The night he found her was the kind of night that erased mercy from the world. The snow falling not gently but angrily, sideways, stinging the skin like thrown salt. The wind screaming through the pine. Trees as if warning anyone, foolish enough to be outside to turn back, while they still could. And Ethan Cole would have listened if he had known what waited beside the half-buried mailbox at the edge of his dying neighbor's property. But he didn't, because Ethan was a man who had spent most of his life responding to other people's emergencies, not expecting one to reach out of the dark and grab him by the heart, and he was only out there because Mr. Harold Bennett hadn't answered his phone all day, because the old man had cancer that had hollowed him out to a whisper of who he once was, because Ethan had promised himself he wouldn't let another person disappear quietly the way his wife had years earlier, slipping away in a hospital bed while he was stuck at work, convincing himself there would be more time. And so he trudged through the snow, with his collar turned up and his flashlight cutting a narrow, trembling path through the white chaos, calling Harold's name into the wind even though he knew the man was likely too weak to answer. And it was when he reached the sagging fence near the road that he saw something that didn't belong, something dark against the snow, something that made his steps slow and his breath catch in his throat, because at first he thought it was a pile of discarded clothes, maybe a blanket blown off the porch, but then the shape moved just barely, a shudder so small it could have been the wind. And then a sound followed, a thin, broken sound that wasn't quite a cry and wasn't quite a breath. And Ethan dropped to his knees without thinking, his gloves already off, his hands shaking as he brushed snow away from a woman's face he had never seen before. Her skin pale to the point of blue, her lips cracked and trembling, her dark hair frozen stiff against her cheeks, and when her eyes fluttered open they were filled not with fear but confusion, as if she didn't understand how she had ended up here, or why the world was so cold. And she tried to speak, but only a rasp came out, and Ethan swore under his breath, shrugging out of his coat and wrapping it around her shoulders, even as the cold bit into his own skin, because he had been a volunteer EMT once, long before life broke him down into simpler routines, and he knew the signs of hypothermia, knew how close she was to slipping into that dangerous calm that came right before the end, and he kept talking to her, telling her his name, telling her she was going to be okay, even though he had no idea if that was true, lifting her carefully, surprised by how light she was, how fragile, like the snow itself had hollowed her out. And as he staggered toward his truck, he noticed the mailbox beside them, the name Bennett barely visible under a crust of ice, and a sudden, awful understanding settled over him. Because Harold Bennett had mentioned something months earlier, spoken about it in a tired, embarrassed voice, about a woman who was supposed to come, about paperwork and agencies and a chance at not dying alone, and Ethan had nodded politely and then forgotten. Because that was what people did with other people's loneliness. They acknowledged it and then moved on. And now here she was, abandoned, freezing, discarded like a mistake someone didn't want to explain. And by the time Ethan got her into the truck and cranked the heat to its highest setting, rubbing her hands and watching color slowly, painfully return to her fingers, he knew this night was not an accident but a collision, the kind that shattered lives and rearranged them into something unrecognizable. And when she finally whispered her name, Anya, barely audible over the wind, Ethan felt something inside him crack open, because names mattered, because saying them meant someone existed, and he promised her again that she was safe, even as his mind raced with questions he couldn't yet ask, about why she had been left there, about whether Harold was even still alive, about what kind of world arranged for a woman to travel across oceans only to be abandoned in the snow beside a dying man's house. And as the truck cut through the storm toward town, Anya's head resting weakly against the window, Ethan had no way of knowing that this moment, this single decision to stop and look closer instead of driving past, would pull him into a story of betrayal, sacrifice, and unexpected love so powerful it would change every life it touched. And if you're feeling that pull right now, that need to know what happens next, remember that these are the stories worth staying for, the ones that remind us why compassion still matters in a cruel world. And that's why subscribing isn't just clicking a button, it's choosing to stay with stories that move you, stories that don't let you look away, stories like this one, because what Ethan would discover next inside Harold Bennett's house in inside his own guarded heart, would shock him in ways the cold never could.